My name is José Losa Reina, and I'm working at the Hospital Virgen del Valle in Spain, and I will present the work entitled The Impact of Relative Mechanical Muscle Power on Health Adverse Outcomes in Older Adults. And we will present an operational definition and algorithm for its application in the clinical setting. The deterioration of functional capacity is one of the main hallmarks and negative consequences of aging. Notably, presenting functional limitations increases costs associated with falls and hospitalizations, and mortality risk to a greater extent than multimorbidity. Sarcopenia has progressively received increased attention due to its association with increased risk of disability and mobility limitations and their associated healthcare costs. As you can see in the slide, there is an increased cost of $2,700 per person every year due to sarcopenia or muscle weakness. However, there are other components of the neuromuscular system that may be more relevant for older adults' functional ability. It is well known that muscle mass is lost with aging, and this is due to also the loss of number of muscle fibers, and there is also a loss in muscle strength. Therefore, these changes in size and morphology can affect the motor function and performance in the elderly. However, mechanical power declines with age at a higher rate than muscle mass and strength, and has also been shown to have a higher association with functional limitations and mortality than sarcopenia. Also, not only there is a rate of decline faster in muscle power compared to muscle strength, but also the start of the decline earlier. So, as you can see in the slide, from results from our group, in the left figure, you can see muscle power is lost at the age of 30 years, and this loss is increased at 50 years of age. However, as you can see on the right figure, muscle strength is lost about 40 years of age, and the decline starts at that age. Furthermore, muscle power is also more related to physical function than muscle strength, as you can see from this seminal study of Bean, where they compared muscle strength and power with different functional outcomes as SPPB, the stair climb test, habitual gait speed, balance, or the chair rise time. Also, those with low muscle, not mass, it should state power, okay? Those with low muscle power have a double chances of having a low physical function than those that have a low muscle strength, as you can see from the figure in this study. So muscle power is all, especially relative to body mass, is related to a decrease in physical function, an increased risk of falls, a decreased quality of life and cognitive function, and a higher dependency in activities of the daily living. And also, it's associated with an increased mortality. As you can see from this study in 2004, from Metter and colleagues, having a low muscle power, this is just for an example, being in the 5th percentile of muscle power is associated with an increased risk compared to someone that is in the 95th percentile of muscle power. And this is this is explained and with a 4 increased years in mortality. So having a low muscle power is related to having an increased risk and less years of living. But why muscle power assessment and its utilization has not been adequately encouraged and addressed in the clinical setting? Well, usually measuring muscle power requires an expensive and technical equipment. You can see that here we have accelerometers, linear position transducer that measures velocity and of movement, and a force plate platform. So these are the gold standards to measure muscle power. So these devices also require data analysis and are expensive and cannot be moved from one place to another. So it's difficult to measure muscle power in the clinical setting. So its applicability has been compromised in these settings. So the aims of this study were first to evaluate the relationship of lower limb muscle power with mortality, hospitalization. Second, to provide an operational definition and algorithm of low relative muscle power and to assess the ability of sarcopenia compared to low relative muscle power to be associated with impaired gait speed, frailty, disability, and poor quality of life. And finally, to assess the impact that different components accounting for relative muscle power have in physical function and frailty. According to the methods, the study design, these data belong to the Toledo Study for Healthy Aging, which is a population-based longitudinal study of institutionalized and community-dwelling individuals aged 65 years and over. The main study design is subjects come for the first visit to be assessed with a neuropsychological evaluation by a trained psychologist. Then they come a second day and the nurses perform a physical examination and some clinical tests as an ECG, spirometry, etc. And in the final visit, they come to the university to have their body composition analyzed and evaluated through dual energy X-ray absorptiometry at DEXA scan. The participants of the study who completed all the stages of the study were included in the analysis. This was a total of 2,332 older adults, of which 57% were women. However, due to missing data, only 1,928 subjects were finally included. In a final analysis, in a further analysis in which we developed the algorithm that I will present at the end of the presentation, 1,189 older adults were included, and these were assessed by mini-mental state examination questionnaire and for cognitive function and for physical function through the short physical performance battery. As you can see, the participants had a mean age around 66 years old and had a good cognitive function with a mini-mental score of around 25 and an SPPB around 9. They were, in most of the cases, quite independent in both the basic activities of the daily living and the instrumental activities of the daily living. Now this slide is very important for us because it's the main outcome of our study, how we measured muscle power. Okay, so I want you to be really focus on this slide. Okay, so we measured muscle powers through a very simple test. Okay, with 5 repetition sit to stand muscle power test that we validated in 2018. Okay, and is very relevant clinically compared to the sit to stand test times. Okay, and it only needs a stopwatch and a chair to measure muscle power. Okay, so very briefly, the subjects performed as fast as possible 5 repetitions, and muscle power is composed of force times the velocity. Okay, so the force is calculated with the body mass that is moved in this test that we measured, that it was 90%. So this is the factor that is corrected here. Okay, and G, gravity value, and then velocity that was measured through this equation that takes into account the height of the subjects, okay, the height of the chair, and the time of the test multiplied by 0.1. This is just the time that it takes to get up one time, okay? Only the consecutive phase of the muscle contraction. So as you can see, with a very easy way, we can assess muscle power. Other outcomes, well, variables that we measured were hand grip strength and knee extension strength with a dynamometer. We assessed also muscle mass with a DEXA scan, and we calculated the appendicular skeletal muscle index, dividing the appendicular muscle mass by the squared height of the subjects. We also measured sarcopenia, and this was measured with the European Working Group on Sarcopenia in Older People algorithm and classification that takes into account on a first stage muscle strength. Okay, and here you have the cutoff points, which determines if this subject has a probable sarcopenia. Then it takes into account muscle quantity or quality. In our case, we measured this with a skeletal muscle index, and here you have also the cutoff points. And having these two items of the classification, you have confirmed sarcopenia, and the algorithm also takes into account low physical performance, but we didn't use this in our study. Frailty was measured by means of the Frailty syndrome, which is a very clinical test and scale, not maybe considered the gold standard for frailty, and the Frailty trait scale that it was developed in our group in 2014, which is a more complex measurement. We also measured health-related quality of life with the EQ5D5L questionnaire and level of disability with the CAT index and the Lawton Brody scale. And for the data analysis, muscle power was divided into different items. Okay, and we wanted to analyze the different components of the muscle power. We have in the first level the relative muscle power to body mass. This is absolute muscle power divided by the body mass, and on the next level we have the absolute muscle power, or allometric muscle power, which is this relative muscle power divided by BMI. Okay, so it's corrected for height and BMI on the other hand. And on the third level we have a specific muscle power, which is at the same time absolute muscle power by the relative leg lean mass. Okay, divided by the relative leg lean mass. And finally, we have the relative leg lean mass as another component of this absolute muscle power. Okay, so these are the different levels of analysis. For our statistical analysis, for the first aim, we compared the survivors versus deceased and hospitalized versus non-hospitalized subjects. At the following test, we compared the relative muscle power groups, which we used tertiles, okay, and we also had a very low muscle power group, which was subjects that were not able to stand up from the chair, but were able to walk and to perform physical tests, but not to stand up from the chair. We used the Cox hazard model for the associations with mortality and hospitalization with different muscle power groups. For the next aim, number 2, we used a logistic regression to study associations of sarcopenia and low relative muscle power with negative health outcomes. And we also defined through receiver-operated characteristic curves the optimal cutoff points for each of the components of the algorithm of the muscle power that I presented a few slides ago. And the final aim was to study the different components and the impact of them. So we just performed a one-way ANOVA to compare these groups. And when this was significant, we used pairwise comparisons corrected for Monferroni or James Howell's test. Our results show that for the first aim, we compared the hospitalized versus non-hospitalized. As you can see from the table, we have men and women on different analyses. Basically, those that were hospitalized were older, had a worse cognitive function, were more frail, were able to walk at a lower speed, had less strength, and were less powerful. And also they had a less physical activity, which was measured with the physical activity scale for the elderly test. Okay, this is almost the same for women and for men. Comparing dead with alive, the results show were similar to hospitalized versus non-hospitalized, but here we see more differences according to morbidity measured with the Charlson index, and in this case BMI was also different in dead compared to alive. Okay, so there seems to be more difference in dead compared to alive than those that were hospitalized versus non-hospitalized. When analyzing the different muscle power groups, okay, we saw what we expected, that those that had a high muscle power and medium muscle power were younger than those that had a very low muscle power. They had a better cognitive function, okay, those with higher muscle power. They had less comorbidities, in this case just compared with the with the low muscle power groups, okay. However, there were no differences in BMI. Additionally, those with a higher muscle power were less frail, according to the Frailty trail scale, and they had a lower percentage of frail according to Frailty syndrome of Fried. Okay. According to the gait speed, those with a higher muscle power, as we saw in the introduction, they had a higher usual gait speed, and the percentage of subjects that had a low gait speed were lower. Okay, so that's just to prove what we saw in the introduction. related to muscle power and strength. Those with a higher muscle power were also stronger, okay? And also, they had a higher physical activity level. When analyzing the association of muscle power with hospitalization, we saw that those that had, in men that had a very low muscle power, were at a higher risk of being hospitalized. The different models that you can see here, in the first model, we just wanted to have the unadjusted model with no confounding variables. In the second model, we adjusted for age. In the third model, we adjusted for physical activity, also plus model 2, and on the final model, we used model 3 plus other confounding variables such as BMI, educative level, level of depression, Charlson index, and level of disability. Similar results were found in women, but in this case, even women with a low muscle power were having a higher risk of hospitalization. However, for the final model, only the very low muscle power groups had this increased risk. For mortality, interesting results show similar results as to the hospitalization in men, but in women, we saw that when accounting for physical activity, this increased risk disappeared. Okay, so the explanation of the association between mortality and muscle power could be due to physical activity in women. When comparing sarcopenia with low relative muscle power, according to the risk of different health outcomes, we see that probable sarcopenia in the upper panel and lower sarcopenia have a similar outcome of being able to predict the risk of, for example, frailty and low usual gait speed, or disabilities in more than one activity of the daily living. However, low muscle power was able to predict not only low usual gait speed, frailty, and poor quality of life, but also the number of limitations in the instrumental activities of the daily living. So it seems that low muscle power, our instrument, is more sensitive generally than sarcopenia to predict low physical function. For the final aim, we wanted to compare the different components of the muscle power. Okay, so here you can see allometric STSS power compared to BMI, okay, the different levels. So in the first part, you can see that having a high muscle power was protective of developing a low usual gait speed, okay? Not only that, but the prevalence of being or having a low usual gait speed increased as we decreased the level of allometric STSS power. And this was independent of BMI, okay? As you can see in the high group, having a high BMI was not different from the reference group of having a low habitual gait speed. And similar results were found for Frailty scale, where BMI was not influencing the level of frailty according to different levels of muscle power. Finally, the specific muscle power and legs skeletal muscle index were analyzed in this slide. As you can see, having a low specific STSS power was different from the reference group and having this low muscle specific STSS power had a low gait speed independently of the leg skeletal muscle index. Additionally, medium groups had also an increased risk of having this low gait speed. According to Frailty scale, these subjects had the ones that had a high muscle specific power and high leg skeletal muscle index were different from the reference group and were the ones that had a lower Frailty trait scale score. However, having a medium and low power was negative for having or developing a higher score in the Frailty trait scale. Finally, I will present a decision algorithm for the clinical setting in which, first of all, we analyze a low relative STS power, and if this is below the cutoff values that we present in our paper, there are no specific intervention needed, okay? If we analyze our subject and is the case they have a low relative STS power, okay, we should analyze if it has a high BMI, in which case if they don't have a high BMI, there's no specific intervention required, and if they don't have a low allometric STSS power, they don't need a specific intervention, okay, and so they go out of the clinical setting. However, if we see that they have a high BMI, according to these cutoff points, they will need to increase the body composition, and the goal will be to decrease body fat. On the other hand, if they had a low allometric STS power, I recall that this is a combination of relative STSS power divided by BMI, okay? So if they have a low allometric STS power, but there is no body composition analysis available, the goal will be to increase absolute muscle power, okay? However, if we have a body composition analysis and BMI is below these cutoff points, then the goal will also be to improve absolute muscle power, because it will not be probable that they have a high percentage of body fat. However, if BMI is below these cutoff points, okay, we will require a body composition analysis, mainly through DEXA. And after doing this, if low specific STSS power was below these values, okay, and I recall that low specific STS power is allometric power divided by leg skeletal muscle index. If this is not the case, they would not require a specific intervention, and if legs skeletal muscle index is below these cutoff points, is not below these cutoff points, there would not be a specific intervention required either. However, if low specific STSS power is below these cutoff points, the goal will be to increase specific muscle power, and if they have a low skeletal muscle index, the goal will be to increase leg skeletal muscle index, and this will be mainly through resistance training and nutrition. So the conclusions are that relative muscle power measured with an easy, reliable, and inexpensive method was independently and negatively associated with all-cause mortality and hospitalization in older men and women. Low relative STSS power showed a greater clinical relevance than probable sarcopenia among older men and women. And finally, the STSS muscle power test and the proposed algorithm provides health professionals the opportunity to assess and diagnose low relative muscle power in the daily practice. Additionally, the main determinants of low relative muscle power can be identified and specific interventions can be prescribed to revert this negative condition. And I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. Many thanks.